Hello and welcome to Bitcoin with Jake. Today I'm speaking with Brandon Quittem. Hey, Brandon, how are you?
I'm doing wonderful, Jake. Appreciate you having me on.
Absolute pleasure. It's just a wonderful journey learning about people's backgrounds and how they came to Bitcoin. So I enjoy these conversations immensely. To begin today, I'd love to hear a brief overview as to the roles or projects you're involved in the current time. And what we'll do is then we'll have a little bit of a rewind, and we'll have a look at how you actually got to today. And obviously, it's all about Bitcoin. So yeah, give us an update as to what you're up to at the moment, please.
Yeah, absolutely. So right now I am the VP of Communications at Swan, SwanBitcoin.com. We are a Bitcoin-only exchange, and we've been around for a little over 2 years now and growing fast. Team's around 50 now, and we have, most people know us for our retail product, which is kind of an easy way to dollar cost average or just instant buy Bitcoin. But we also have a few other divisions that are lesser known, one being Swan Private, which is kind of like Morgan Stanley private client services. You get a one-on-one rep, you can text them, you get tax advice, you get all this fancy research. And we also have an IRA product. So you can hold Bitcoin in your retirement accounts. And we also have a financial advisor product launching soon. So financial advisors can plug in to buying Bitcoin for their clients, which we see as a big opportunity. And what do I do there from a communication standpoint? I run our email marketing. I oversee most of our content marketing and also sort of like product communication. So anytime we're communicating with customers, it usually runs through my team. And yeah, that's mostly what I do for Swan. And then in my personal time, I try to write as much as possible. Lately, Swan has been in full-on startup mode, so I would say I'm not publishing very often. 1 or 2 essays a year is kind of what I'm looking at. And I'm most well known in the Bitcoin space for comparing Bitcoin or exploring Bitcoin, I should say, through a biological lens. And I think this is an effective tool because a lot of people intuit biology, right? We are of biology. The things sort of make sense and we see it all around us. Whereas most people do not intuit computer science or economics or distributed systems, cryptography, or any number of other facets that might be involved with Bitcoin. And so, yeah, I've done a lot of writing on that. That's kind of how I got started here. And I hope to write more as my time allows. I find a great pleasure in it.
It's always really fun to sit down and actually make yourself write, in that it's, in my experience anyway, it's the best way of forcing you to understand a subject, in that if you can't write it to make sense, then you haven't worked it out yet, if you get what I mean. And yeah, I would be lying if I didn't confess to kind of making sure I read your Bitcoin as Mycelium essay just yesterday. Given we were about to have our conversation, I was like, you know what? I've had that on my to-do list for just so long. I must read that before I speak with Brandon. And that's a great starting point. So anyone that's listening, sit down for an hour, read this. It's a really fantastic piece of work. How on earth did you come to the point where you had the realization and let's say the lens on this world that meant that you understood fungi and that you understood decentralized networks in nature, and then go, oh, hang on, this is kind of like Bitcoin. So maybe we could start there. So were you a biologist growing up, and was that always a passion subject, and how did you become familiar with the natural world and how to study it? And then of course we'll move into how that applies to Bitcoin.
Definitely. So first question, no, I'm not a biologist. I took a single biology class in college. I'm just a biology nerd. I like camping, I like hiking, I like fishing, I like foraging, I like growing food. And so I've just always been interested in the outdoors. And foraging and mushroom study and fungi is way, way before Bitcoin for me. So that started, I started around 2010. So what is that, 12 years ago about? Started foraging, and foraging led to culinary mushrooms and very strange edibles that you can find in the forest. It also led me to psychedelic mushrooms, which I have a quite long history with, and also led to me just generally trying to understand them from an ecology standpoint. And I find every single aspect of fungi to be fascinating. And I find it similar to Bitcoin in a sense that once you start to go down the fungi rabbit hole, you feel like you discovered a secret and you need to share it with everyone. And most Bitcoiners can empathize with the evangelical phase of Bitcoining, where yeah, you just discovered this thing and you have to save all your friends. And really, we kind of come off like crazy people. And I think the words of Matt Odell, shill lightly, that's the ticket, right? Because we kind of come off like, knock, knock, knock. Hey, excuse me, do you have a minute for our Lord and Savior, Satoshi Nakamoto?
Who the fuck's at the
Right.
door? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And of course, humans have this evolutionary trigger in our mind when someone's trying to scam us on something or sell us on something, they're too pushy. We have a little alarm that goes off that makes us skeptical. And so that's why people have so many issues trying to explain Bitcoin. Um, Anyways, that's biology, that's fungi. Then let's fast forward a little bit. It was 2018. I first got into Bitcoin in 2017, ran into it a few times prior, never clicked. And in 2017, went down the shitcoin rabbit hole, trading everything, thought I was a genius. 2018, watched everything crash, realized I was in fact not a genius. And then I went through this intense study period, we'll just say Q1 or going into Q2 of 2018. And that's where I retaught myself everything from the ground up. I read like 20 books in that period. I was reading all the Bitcoin books, economics from the ground up, pretty much just filling in the holes that I needed in order to properly evaluate this thing. And it was around that time when I saw one of the early graphs of the Lightning Network, and it looked like mycelium. And then I started to think about this. Okay, what's going on here? And I was actually at a Bitcoin meetup in Bali, where I know a lot of Aussies go for vacation. And I was living there at the time with my wife. We were in the middle of a 5-year nomading trip where we would just travel and work remotely all over the world. And at that point, it all started to click. I saw the Lightning Network, which looks like a topographical map of mycelium, easy for me to say. And then I went home after that meetup and just started scribbling in my journal. Everything started to make sense. And I wrote most of the first essay in that series in like rough outline bullety form in that journal, just furiously scribbling. And that was maybe March or April, let's say, of 2018. And I didn't publish it actually until December of 2018. And part of the reason was I did not have the courage to put this thing out. Number one, okay, why would anyone listen to me? I'm still relatively new. Number two, all the content I saw at the time was about economics or cryptography or any other slightly more related subjects. And then Dan Held published an essay called Planting Bitcoin, or I had read his essay. And it was a 4-part series, essentially just exploring the early parts of Bitcoin's history through a biological lens. And I thought it was a really good essay. And people liked it. And so I was like, okay, there's something here. The Bitcoiners are more diverse than I thought. I reached out to Dan Held. To my surprise, he helped me edit the first one and gave me some tips on marketing it. And yeah, then published that in 2018. And that was sort of my launching off point in Bitcoin. It was a very strange day. I'd never had something go viral before. And I think it went from like 300 to 3,000 Twitter followers in 24 hours or maybe more. I don't even remember. And all my intellectual heroes in the Bitcoin space were paying attention to me and commenting. I felt validated, all that kind of pat on the back ego stuff. But I think the more lasting takeaway here is that I think there is something real to exploring technology through a biological lens. And I've done a lot more thinking about this since. And I really do view technology now as an extension of the same evolutionary principles that drove evolution. And you can say it was more or less genetic evolution, survival of the fittest, as the phrase goes, over time. And out of that process, we created mind. Okay, and of mind creates technology, and part of that technology process is Bitcoin. And I feel confident in Bitcoin because it mimics evolutionary strategies found in the fungal kingdom. And those evolutionary strategies make fungi among the most resilient species on our planet, or kingdom, I should say, on our planet. And we can go into their history, the things that make them unique, but essentially the overlap of the two gave me confidence. And yeah, that just led me down the deeper path down the rabbit hole and writing more. And that first essay was part one of the long one you read. So if people say, oh man, an hour-long essay, that's too long, just start with the first part. It's maybe 10, 15 minutes. And that's kind of the overview of the thesis. And if you like it, you'll finish it. But if you don't like it, you have an easy out at 10, 15 minutes.
Yeah, no, you heard it here first. Like, just read it, guys. It's well worth it. Oh, Brandon, so much to draw from in your explanation so far. Thank you. I think just from a basic level, could you help teach me about what mycelium is, and going from that like basic tuition to how that then applies to Bitcoin?
Yeah, absolutely. So quick fungi primer here. Fungi are their own kingdom, right? There's 7 kingdoms. There's plants, there's animal, there's fungi. There's a bunch of microscopic things. And so in the fungi kingdom, there's an enormous diversity of organisms. There's actually more fungi than plants and animals combined. They're very, very old organisms. And if we look at the taxonomic tree, humans are more closely related to fungi compared to plants. Both fungi and animals inhale oxygen, exhale carbon dioxide, right? The difference is fungi have external stomachs, we have internal stomachs. We're both heterotrophs, meaning we have to go find food, where plants are autotrophs, they create food. And so there's a lot of unique histories there. And fungi are unique in the fact that they're masters of chemistry. So their body is primarily in the mycelium form. And that is essentially like an underground root system. It's a one cell wall system of tunnels and tubes that are pretty much in every single ecosystem everywhere. If you just go to the forest and take a shovel and dig a hole, there will be millions of miles of mycelium in that shovelful. And so it's just tubes everywhere, just like the internet. And in these tubes, they're hollow. They're sending resources and information all over their little network. So one mycelial map, it might be the size of, a car, or a large one might be 1,000 acres, and it might take over an entire forest of one organism that might be 1,000 years old. And that's the primary form. However, every once in a while, the mycelium senses the environment and it senses the conditions are right, and then it sends up a mushroom. And the mushroom itself is more like the fruiting body. It's like the apple on a tree, or it's the sexual reproductive organ of the mycelial network. And the mushrooms themselves grow very rapidly. As soon as they mature, they release spores, which are little tiny mushroom seeds. Those spores float, they're typically lighter than air. So they just catch an updraft, they fly around, they land nearby. And if they land in a place with good conditions, they colonize that new territory. As long as there's 2 or more spores together, they fuse together, and then they grow a new mycelial network. That's kind of the life cycle. Most of our medicine comes from fungi as humans. I think it's primarily just due to we have similar evolutionary history, and they're great at chemistry and we have similar biology. So it just so happens that stuff they make to defend themselves also works to defend ourselves. Lots of different fungi facts, but that's probably a good starting point.
Yeah, no, great. It's something I know nothing about personally, and I'm sure there'll be many of people listening that are also in the same boat. So forgive the kind of slightly basic questions, but I love the definition between plants, humans, and fungi. Right, they're 3 separate ecosystems altogether. You mentioned that we use medicine products that are created from fungi. Perhaps this was also related to your comments briefly earlier about getting into psychedelics and realizing you've uncovered the secret. Talk to me a bit more about that. Like, what secret have you found when you went down that rabbit hole initially?
Specifically psychedelics, or just the secret of the fungal kingdom?
All of it, basically. I mean, so when
Yeah,
you first
both.
started researching about it, you're like, how does no one know about this? And then you're like, okay, well,
Yeah,
if they don't know about this part of it, then hang on, what's the psychedelics bit? Like, how did that
definitely.
journey play out?
Yeah, I'll end with psychedelics because that's a big topic on its own. So I say I feel like I discovered a secret because, in my view, the fungal kingdom has the answer to a ton of the problems we face as a species today. And I'll rattle off some of those. One is producing food. So there's pretty much no plants and almost no trees on our entire planet that don't have a fungal ally underground helping them. So there are many different types of fungus, but one of them is the mycorrhizal fungus, which essentially means they connect into tree roots. And early trees actually didn't have roots. And they essentially developed roots. This is the theory. The theory is that plants develop roots in order to seek out fungal allies underground. And the plants and the fungus know each other. And the plant actually opens their cell wall to allow fungus to come in. And they essentially bolt themselves to the roots so then they can trade resources. And so the fungus mines minerals. It literally digests its environment, rocks or soil or insects or other bacteria, digests it externally, liberates all those molecules and gives it to the plant. And the plant uses photosynthesis and pulls carbon dioxide out of the air to create heavy fat and sugar molecules. And it gives that down to the fungus as food. So they have a symbiotic relationship. And so let's say you want to have a healthy ecosystem, you need to have fungal allies. You want to grow more food. Okay, fine. Supplement the soil with the proper fungi, right? If you want to colonize Mars, okay, there's many experimental ideas, but we should look to fungi because fungi are extremophiles. They live on every single part of our planet where other organisms can't live. So there's something to learn there. The mushroom spores, they can survive in outer space, the vacuum of outer space. They can essentially lay dormant for infinity time, and then they can land in the perfect conditions. And if they land in perfect conditions, they could regrow and bootstrap life entirely from that one spore, or I should say 2 spores. And so that brings us to panspermia, which is one theory of how life started on Earth. There's one is life started literally on Earth, a hot vent and some chemistry and some energy, and all of a sudden you create life. Alternatively, fungal spores that started life elsewhere could have landed on Earth, which started the colonization process. And now we're in response to that.
I've never heard that before. Wow.
Quite mind-blowing one.
Yeah.
If we want to prevent, let's say, a pandemic, maybe we should study our fungal allies because they have keys to unlocking certain medicines that we're going to need in the future, right? So you just start going down the list. They can rehabilitate environmental catastrophes. You can literally have oyster mushrooms eat spilled oil. And the problem with oil is that it has hydrocarbon bonds, which are extremely hard to break. And so cleaning up oil is hard simply because of that. But the mushrooms are so good at chemistry, they break the hydrocarbon bonds and they decompose that oil into its base elements, the hydrogen, the carbon, and others. And then it turns that into food. And so it can literally clean up an oil spill and out produces perfectly edible mushrooms. Right. So you start to go down this list and you go, wow, they can do so much. And they're criminally understudied. So the fungi nerds are in like a small club. Yeah, similar with Bitcoin, although that's quite quickly changing. But in 2017, before that bull market, it didn't seem like a very well-known thing, right? So you're part of this early club, and I view that similar with fungi. To wrap up with psilocybin, certain mushrooms, I think there's close to 200 now that we know of that produce psilocybin, which is a molecule that mimics serotonin. So it looks just like serotonin, which is a common neurotransmitter that all animals use. And serotonin is used to modulate time, emotions, sleep. Some of the core emotional, higher reasoning things that humans do is modulated with serotonin. And the receptors in our brain that accepts the serotonin molecule also accept the psilocybin molecule, same as the LSD molecule as well. And so these sort of serotonin mimics are just so happen to be found all in nature, and we don't know why. They're found in most ecosystems. And the leading hypothesis is that fungi use psilocybin to defend themselves from insects or other animals. And it just so happens that humans have a relatively positive experience interacting with these molecules. And so, yes, I've spent quite a bit of time in that world studying, experimenting with these intentionally or for more fun reasons. And I found a lot of personal development comes on the other side of those experiences. And it pleases me to see that our society today is starting to wake up to these realizations and starting to decriminalize or make them okay for medicines, different treatments, et cetera. However, I find these to be way, way more important than simply a pharma molecule to cure a known ailment, right? I think that's too narrow. I think these are good for well people, for healthy people who want to improve their mental health, to want to have more fulfillment in life, to want to be more in touch with themselves and their family, to just get out of a rut you're in, to have creative insight, to have more spiritual connection, to be more in tune with nature, to improve your relationship with addictions. All the neurotic parts of ourselves, myself included, can be remedied from these tools. And so I find them to be an ally. They're not for everyone, but they're a very, very powerful ally if used responsibly.
Wow. And again, I have so many questions, but I love the fact that you said you weren't traditionally trained in biology, and the explanations you're running through here, I find very often, when you're passionate about something and you have context, then you can study whatever you want as deep as you want. And what you're explaining today is just a great reflection of that. So, well done. You've obviously done a lot of work to get to this point. It's really cool to hear you talk about it. And so, okay, so you've gained all this knowledge, you've had this experience. I mean, I remember as a 16-year-old eating some magic mushrooms and having a crazy kind of night out, but I would never have expected the world of fungi to be so complex and potentially rich and deep. And I'd love to touch on here, as part of the article I read of yours yesterday, the very, very I don't know how to describe it, but there was a archaeological discovery, and there was a human, a Homo sapien, found from I can't remember how many thousand years ago, carrying 2 bits of fungi. So perhaps this is wisdom that humankind has had for a very long time, but for whatever reason isn't around in such a popular way as it could have been. Do you think that as far back as, I don't know, you'll remember the story better because you wrote it, but perhaps just talk a little bit about that. So fungi's been used forever, is that right?
Yeah, as old as we have archaeological evidence, let's say cave paintings, we have relationships with fungi.
Wow.
And so we don't know for sure that ancient human, let's say 200,000 years ago, were using fungi, but our oldest recorded information is also about fungi. And there's famous, I think the most famous cave painting is in Algeria, and it's quite interesting. Just look up ancient mushroom cave art if you're curious about this, but it's very, very clearly mushrooms. And then you can look at the narratives themselves. They appear to be mystical in nature. So how they portray them is mystical, like mushrooms growing out of your head, or in relation to aurochs, which is an ungulate, like a cow essentially, and the mushrooms grow out of the cow's dung. And so as far as we can tell, they've been used for a long time. Interestingly, mushrooms almost escaped modernity. So it was in the 50s when, excuse me, a banker actually went down to Mexico and found a mushroom shaman and Maria Sabina, and said banker was initiated into her mushroom ritual, which was using psilocybin. I had a very powerful experience, came home, wrote an article in Time magazine, I think in 55. That magazine introduced magic mushrooms to the developed world. And Maria Sabina died not that long after. And if she didn't introduce him to a Westerner, which was more or less against the tradition, but she for some reason felt called to do so, we might not have even known that mushrooms existed today. And that catalyzed an enormous resurgence of psilocybin.
Wow.
A lot of people in the 60s and 70s grew mushrooms and sold them to their friends in college to pay for college. It's led to countless studies, tremendous health benefits, right? All from that one little catalyst, which I find fascinating. And so we almost lost these. Thankfully, we didn't. To your point, the archaeological evidence is they call him Otzi the Iceman. and he was found in the Swiss Alps. I want to say 5,000 or 6,000 years ago. And he essentially just froze to death in the mountains. And what's interesting is his body is really well preserved. And so we can kind of take a look at his possessions. And he had 3 possessions, 2 of which were mushrooms. One of those is a tinder conch, which is a special mushroom just due to its cell, the composition of its fruiting body. You can hold an ember inside it for multiple days. So picture it's winter, you're crossing the Alps, and if you don't have fire, you die. How do you start a fire, right, in this horrible condition? You just create a little chamber with this mushroom, and you can literally just carry an ember, a smoldering ember, for days. That was one of his mushrooms. The other mushroom was a necklace, and it was essentially the shape of a donut hole, which is it's called a birch polypore. I find them all over. Great medicinal mushroom. And that medicinal mushroom is a known, it's active against a bacterial parasite that they found inside Otzi's stomach. So he had a necklace with the medicine for the disease he had. And that same mushroom, when it's fully dried out, it turns into this really hard material, hard enough to sharpen your knife. So he had a knife sharpener, he carried fire, and he had medicine on his person. Wow. All mushrooms. And so then you could say, well, those are pretty important tools. And then you might say, okay, mushrooms confer an evolutionary advantage. So the ancient man who formed a relationship with these fungi learned about them. He would survive better than his non-mushroom affiliated counterpart. And so I believe that forming symbiosis with mushrooms was good then. And I also think it's good now, from a nutrition standpoint, medicinal standpoint, and from a psilocybin standpoint. And tying that to Bitcoin, I view Bitcoin in a similar sense through symbiosis lens, which is that as an individual, it would be wise to form a relationship with this decentralized superorganism we call Bitcoin. On an individual level, Bitcoin teaches us many things. It teaches us to think long-term or lower our time preference. It teaches us to take responsibility for our life, managing private keys. It teaches us, I could probably go on for a long time there on what it teaches us. It also preserves our wealth, right? So it essentially gives us free time back, allows us to pursue our passions. And on a society level, I view Bitcoin as sort of an immune response to an increase or an overproduction of centralized systems. Our central banks, are extremely bloated central governments, and the tools that they wield, I think, is starting to create imbalance where the state has too much power and the individual is sort of helpless. And I think central planning on its face is a flawed concept, and we should instead strive for emergent order, which involves freedom and individual liberties and rights, and allowing humans to trade and be as free as humanly possible. And so as a society, we should form symbiosis with Bitcoin because it provides freedom, and freedom creates innovation. Innovation creates prosperity. And so all the good things we want in a complex society are downstream from allowing humans to do what they're best at in as most free of a context as possible. And so, yeah, I think we should form symbiosis with Bitcoin. And, I think we have 2 choices here, right? We're in the adoption phase. As an individual today, you might say, I don't know about Bitcoin. The government might ban it. There's still some risks. And that's true. There's a non-zero chance that Bitcoin fails. Or you can buy some Bitcoin today and learn about this thing. And if we're right, you're going to be on the early side of this thing, and you're going to have a tremendously improved future by doing so. And so, yeah, I like to joke around and say we should submit to our fungal overlords. Yeah, it's probably enough on that rant.
To draw an immediate analogy, though, would you say Arzi? What was the name of the frozen ancient body?
Yeah, Otzi or Ortzi.
Okay, let's say it's Arzi. There's every chance that, okay, he got found frozen. It means it didn't work out. But what are the chances of the fact he was adopting these fungi as tools, gave him the ability to even have the balls to try and do what he was doing? And do you know what I mean? So like maybe no one else around him had adopted those tools in the same way. Maybe they hadn't understood that he could actually like solve his disease, or that he could carry fire through the mountains. And he adopted these tools before anyone else and was attempting something that wasn't even possible prior to when he was trying to do it. And he didn't make it in the end. But a really fascinating concept that you bring to the table here of the advantage of getting ahead on the adoption curve and trying to look around you today and thinking, okay, well, humans are driven by psychological self-interest. It's pretty clear. How do I make sure that my kids and my friends and family have the best chance of survival in the future? Okay, what's this Bitcoin thing? Okay, that actually makes a lot of sense. Oh, it's still working. Oh, okay. Well, let's learn a bit more about it. And it could be, yeah, what a brilliant way of looking at it. And this is what I love about these conversations is everyone's journey to Bitcoin is unique, and everyone has a slightly different, therefore, lens on what it means. And this is a completely fresh perspective that I hadn't heard from anyone else, making the very clear comparison between what's happened in nature and history and what's happening right now. Perhaps, Brandon, you could speak a little bit to this concept of a decentralized network and how fungi have managed to survive the most difficult of like scenarios, a market crash, but like, nature extincts things. What is the advantage of being a decentralized network in that sense? And what's that as a comparison to how Bitcoin is designed?
Yeah, good question. So let's start with Mycelium here.
And sorry,
It
if I
is
could just jump in,
a
Brandon, you used the words earlier of your understanding gave you confidence in Bitcoin. I think that's where ultimately this particular line of thought will take us, but just as another trigger point as to where that might go.
Definitely. And let's underline that quick. There's this idea called consilience, which is that if multiple schools of thought or theories overlap and they all point to the same answer, the more overlapping ideas that point to the same answer, the more confident you can be. And so that's sort of like a nice vocab word to define that idea.
Convergence or confluence, it's similar, isn't it? And like, people have trading tools and they're looking at all of their different indicators and suddenly they all hit the same point, pointing in a direction. They go, okay, now we go. Yeah, cool.
Exactly.
I get you.
Yeah, same idea. So, okay, mycelial networks, they are more like a bunch of mini organisms all working together. It's all fungal cells that share the same biology and they fuse together to create a network. Now, if you just take a scissors and cut this network in half, let's say, you wouldn't kill the organism. There would actually be two mycelial mats now. Okay, so there's no central brain, there's no CPU, there's no controller. And instead, the organism itself is a network, and the network makes decisions in its local area. So let's say on one edge of the network, it's looking and it's saying, should I eat this? Should I run away from that? Should I go towards that? Right. And the edge of the network makes all the decisions. And Bitcoin is very similar. It has the same architecture, right? The Bitcoin network is made up of individuals and nodes and miners. And we all have these kind of specialized roles, but we're all acting in our own best interest. And our sum total of actions is actually what creates the network. And if you fork off 10% of the network, what happens? Well, now there's two networks, right? You could bomb all of the United States, kill everyone and break all the machines. Bitcoin's going to keep chugging along, right? There is no center point to take out. And so in that sense, they are decentralized. And on the anti-fragile side, right? Why are networks a powerful idea? In fungi, the network itself can be split, so that makes it resilient. But the network also learns and it adapts. Okay, so let's say a microorganism, some sort of bacterium was trying to attack a fungi. That fungi will look at the bacteria. It'll send information into the network. So now the whole network knows what the attacker is. And then specialized mushroom cells will actually produce a custom enzyme. It will invent the antidote to the attacker, send that information back through the network to where the problem is, and take care of the problem. And in the process, the fungus learns. It now has a new molecule in its chemical library to defend itself. And over time, the library gets bigger and bigger and bigger as they adapt to their environment, right? And their invaders are learning new tricks. Those new tricks attack the fungus, and the fungus learns, and it's constantly trying to find some sort of equilibrium. And Bitcoin is the same way, where let's say there's a bug in the code or there's an issue with social consensus, right? Information travels through the network. The software developers create a new patch or enzyme. Once we agree on the new software, they ship it out to the network, everyone updates, and now the system learns, it adapts, and it actually becomes stronger from attacks. And so in a Talebian sense, both are anti-fragile. Now, if you look through history, fungi are the most well-adapted species on our planet. They've survived all 6 mass extinction events. Right. So let's use the dinosaur one. That's the one most people know. 65 million years ago, what appears to be, we went through the Taurid meteor stream, asteroids hit our planet, created tremendous changes in climate. And in that process, most organisms died. And the transition point there, which is quite interesting, was we went from a planet run by reptiles. So it was dinosaurs. And just a tiny, tiny, tiny percentage of the organisms were mammals, and they were mostly irrelevant. Okay, then the meteor hits, it creates a dust cloud. That dust cloud blocks out the sun. Okay, reptiles are cold-blooded, and now all of a sudden the temperature declined tremendously for multiple years. What does that do? Now all of a sudden the dinosaurs and all reptiles have no energy. They can't get around. They can't find food. So most of the dinosaurs, dinosaurs die. Some evolved into birds or other type of reptiles we have today. But in that process, a mammal, which is warm-blooded, similar to a shrew, we call it the tenrec. And this little organism, tiny little mouse thing, can burrow underground. It can actually take really long naps and hibernate and slow its heart rate down. And so it's kind of like this adaptable little underground mouse. And that little thing survived this horrible period where we blocked out the sun, and it can eat anything. And so then all of a sudden the weather gets better, climate returns, sun comes back, the little tenrec pops out of his hole, and all the dinosaurs are gone. And now it's the period of mammals that started 65 million years ago. And now the warm-blooded creatures took over. So we are descendants of that tiny little mouse that survived that long, dark night. Okay, what about fungi? Fungi do not need the sun. Okay, fungi create their own food, right? Plants need the sun, fungi don't. So fungi went around and consumed all the waste. They ate all the dead dinosaurs. They ate all the dead plants. And, a lot of fungi died as well, but they're so adaptive as a group that they survived that period. And many of them are still around today. And so you can look at all previous extinctions, fungi survive them all. And I think it's because they're anti-fragile, they're decentralized, they can change up their food source, they have interesting ways to reproduce. And I think adding this all up from a biological standpoint, the Bitcoin network appears to be a new type of digital organism. And if it is true, it's most similar to Mycelium. And so the more I study one, the more I learn about the other, and it's sort of symbiotic in that sense. Yeah, that's probably enough on that topic.
No, that's great. And to your point, like listening to you talk about this helped me grow in confidence. The whole point of a money is you want to know that money is going to still be around in the future. Like, why would I change from a system that I know has problems to a system that definitely won't work? Like, it's about confidence, and perhaps it is just perceived confidence that gives the network its ability to grow like Bitcoin has done. It doesn't matter. The point is that the conversation we're having right now is filling me with additional confidence that this is something that is incredibly hard to kill. And if it is like fungi, it can survive what the dinosaurs couldn't. Wow. I mean, of course, it's probably quite an out there claim to make. A lot of people think we're mental even buying Bitcoin in the first place, but it's really cool. Okay, and so someone who's obviously spent a lot of time thinking about evolution, do you think Bitcoin is a discovery or an innovation?
Yeah, I don't have a strong opinion on this. I think both explorations lead you to interesting outcomes.
Mm-hmm.
I think I always come back to the math. Math is kind of the same way. It's like, did we invent math or did we discover math? And I think the more we learn about the universe, the more we realize that nature uses math as well in all of its processes. And we're just starting to discover the equations that make sense of our world around us. And I think the idea of digital scarcity was discovered rather than invented, but the unique way that Bitcoin is constructed, I think that is an invention. We figured out this really strange, hacky way to make information scarce. And I don't think many people, a lot of Bitcoiners do, but even a lot of Bitcoiners don't grasp how revolutionary it is to have scarce information. And how a messaging system based on scarce information is also useful as a money, right? And so, yeah, that's pretty much all I really think about that. Like,
No, it's a good
I think it's a
preface.
more fun question than useful, I guess.
Yeah. No, that's nice. It's. I agree. I don't have a hugely strong opinion, but as I was thinking, you might, given the evolutionary process that we spoke through, but actually you explained that extremely well. So no need to go there. What's fun is the phrase proof of work that you mentioned. And thinking about, back in 2017 or 2018, whenever it was that you had these ideas, and you're now the head of communications at Swan, which is a Bitcoin startup that's absolutely flying. Did you ever imagine that you'd be in the position you're in today? And how does it feel to have gone through the process that you did actually put your thoughts and you wrote some articles, and just talk to me a little bit about that personal journey and how it's felt.
Yeah, definitely. And if I could, I'll take the bait on proof of work, which
Yeah,
is
do
one of my favorite
yeah.
topics. Okay, one quick fungi analogy here. So a lot of people think that proof of work is wasteful. Okay, but I would like to frame this up through a fungal analogy. One type of fungi are called saprophobes or saprophytic fungi, which just means that they decompose material. So they will, okay, you're in the forest and a leaf hits the ground. What happens to that leaf? Right? Fungi and bacteria leap out of the ground, they grab onto that leaf and they decompose it through chemistry, liberating the phosphorus, nitrogen, carbon, oxygen, etc., the base molecules, and then recycle that back into the ecosystem. If that didn't happen, we'd be buried under hundreds of feet of organic material, right? So what's happening is the fungi are liberating stranded resources and redistributing them into the ecosystem. Okay, now let's talk about proof of work. There's a lot of stranded energy around in the world. Why is there stranded energy? Well, because you have to match supply and demand of energy. And it's really hard to match those two perfectly everywhere all at once. It's hard to move energy long distances. It's hard to store energy. So you more or less need to have your consumers right next to the production. Okay, but since it doesn't happen very much, there's all this excess energy that we literally just waste. Alternatively, rather than wasting it, we could have Bitcoin miners appear next to that energy source and convert that excess energy into sound money, right? And that is, in a sense, like the fungus liberating a stranded energy asset and turning the molecules inside or the energy inside into something more useful, right? So you're liberating stuck resources. And I think that's how we should think about Bitcoin in terms of the network strength. It's a positive thing, not a negative thing. Anyways, that's a quick little tidbit there. Your other question, what about Swan? Did I think writing online would lead to an opportunity like this, et cetera? It's a good question. To go back to 2017 and early 2018, once I had the eureka moment, I knew with 100% certainty I need to spend all my time here. And so I anticipated a career change very soon after it clicked. And so all of 2018, I was writing for random articles. I'll do any consulting that anyone will have me. I was just scrappy trying to figure out a way to break into the industry. And I was fortunate because the previous stage of life, quick aside, I look at my adult life in 3 stages. Stage 1 was Oracle software sales rep, extroverted, douchebag, ego, money, success, fame, nice things. Then I transitioned into this nomadic, psychedelic, yogi entrepreneur and spent 5 years traveling, working remotely, building online businesses, a little bit of 4-hour work week type thinking sprinkled in there. And then I found Bitcoin. And so Bitcoin was sort of the transition out of that nomadic, entrepreneurial, hippie type stage of my life. And I had a very nice online business at the time that paid for my wife and I to travel and do whatever we wanted for years. And so fortunately, I had all my stuff paid for while I just went nerding out into Bitcoin land and reading 10 to 20 hours a day for months on end. And so I feel very fortunate about that. And so, yes, I knew I wanted to work in the industry. I'm confident in my ability to build businesses. And so I was confident that I would land somewhere good eventually. But, all of 2018, I did bullshit work. 2019, I started a consulting firm with some friends and we were doing well, but ended up dissolving that firm. And I started just doing random one-off things for different Bitcoin companies. And I met Corey Clipson, the CEO of Swan, at a Bitcoin conference, actually Bitcoin 2019 in San Francisco. We had a quick chat there, didn't think much of it. And then, and I say this for people who want to work in the industry, go to the conferences, network with the people. 3 months or 6 months later, I went to Los Angeles, visit some friends, and I just tweeted, hey, I'm coming to LA. What Bitcoiners want to meet up? Part of that was some square-jawed hunk named Robert Breedlove, who was relatively unknown at the time, said, hey, let's get together. I want to talk about your essay. And I was like, who's this meathead? All right, it's convenient, I'll go. And then I sit down and we spend 5 hours together. We become wonderful friends. I learned he's an incredibly deep thinker. He's not a meathead. And I consider him a close personal friend now. Later that day, I met up with Corey Clipston, who also responded to that tweet and said, hey, come on my podcast. We'll have a chat. And so I met with Corey, went on his podcast, which was the flagship podcast for Swan's first product, which was called Give Bitcoin. Swan wasn't invented at the time. The idea was if you give Bitcoin to someone and you give them education over time, hopefully they'll learn and sort of be incentivized to learn because they own some. Excuse me. And then Corey and I went out to lunch after the podcast and he was just, we're just chatting about life. And he learned about my email marketing skills and how I would build content businesses where a blog post leads to an email list, an email list leads to education, and later I asked for the sale. And so you could sort of build these marketing automation funnels. And I got really good at it. And that's what sort of paid the bills in the businesses. And Corey's like, oh, that's cool. You should do that for Swan, or I should say Give at the time. And I joined as an advisor just to help him set up his email marketing funnels. And then it turned into, okay, well, we're going to need you to do that for a few more months and a few more months. And every couple of months, they doubled my time and pay. And it just led into a full-time job. And then I sold the online businesses, got rid of the consulting clients, and been Swan full-time since early 2020. I guess I started end of 2019, but yeah. So did I think that was all going to happen? Kind of, yes, but it took longer than I hoped. It was more meandering than I hoped. And I do think writing online, to get to the core of your question, is the superpower here for me. And it's not because I'm some exceptional writer. It's the fact that writing online in today's age, I think, is a superpower because you're essentially putting your bat signal up. Here's my ideas. Here's my proof of work. Here's my thoughts. And if you have relatively good ideas and you can communicate them decently well, you're going to find a whole bunch of people. I should say whole bunch of people are going to find you. And they're going to be the type of people you want to hang out with, that you want to work for, et cetera, because they also resonate with your ideas. So you're literally building this inbound flow of opportunities simply by putting yourself out there. And so I think anyone getting started in any industry should be, if they want to break in, I think the best thing to do is write online. And to your point, very beginning, number one, it's going to sharpen your thinking. I don't consider myself confident on a topic until I force myself to write an essay on it. Even if I don't publish it, I must sit down and do the hard work of writing, because that's where the thinking gets real. And since then, you sort of build a reputation in the idea space. And I don't want to sound like I'm bragging, but like there's lots of opportunities coming in just from having your ideas out there. And something I published in 4 years ago now still leads to friends, opportunities, job offers, etc. And I see that continuing going forward. And so yeah, I can't emphasize it enough. Like, create content online, no question.
No, it's really inspiring, actually. What a wonderful story. The kind of super high time preference, kind of day to day stresses and strains of the modern popular world, shall we say, where like, you know, you've got 140 characters, you've got to say your whole life story in like a tweet, and it requires very little work. Like you just, it's a small, like tiny amount of time. Whereas actually sitting down and, you know, of course, like when you, well, at least for me, so I grew up in the UK, school was essentially exams at the end of a 12-month period where you've got to sit down for 3 hours, you've got to regurgitate an essay. And in some senses, it was like a memory test. It wasn't actually necessarily like a cognitive process where you actually tested yourself intellectually. You just had to remember like what to say rather than like think about what it was you needed to say. And it's all under time pressure, etc. So it's really cool to hear that actually, if you do sit down and you do your own research and you come up with a specific lens on the world that you clearly did here, then 4 years later, you're still getting inbound inquiry from that. Point being is a quality piece of work actually really shines through online versus all of the other kind of high time preference, menial crap that people send around all day long. Well, cool. Brandon, thank you so much for sharing all of this. It's been a great story. So perhaps just to look to the future for a moment, we chatted briefly online. I've had a daughter recently and another one on the way, and you're about to become a parent yourself. So what do the next few years have in store, and how does the future look now that Bitcoin's such a big part of your life?
Yeah, definitely. I appreciated our pre-recording aspect of the conversation. And yes, wife and I are having our first child due in 3 months. So kind of coming down to the wire now. It's feeling very real. She looks very pregnant, and I feel my unborn child. She put my hand on her stomach, moving around all the time. And so yeah, it's been a pretty wild experience, I would say. What I would say is interesting here is that 5 years ago, right, stage two, the hippie nomad period, I would say I was at a period of peak nihilism in my life. I saw the world being totally messed up. I saw our leaders being incompetent. I spent a lot of energy in the political arena trying to make change. And I found my efforts to be futile, watched Occupy squander and fail. I watched Bernie Sanders try to make a change and be rug pulled essentially. And so I saw all this horrible things happening in the world, and I was not optimistic. So I was more living for the moment and the memories, not interested in saving money, not interested in family, sort of turning my back on my biology in a way. And Bitcoin, which was not a fast process, but Bitcoin led me back to more traditional values, which is really funny for me to say now compared to who I was. But it led me to think more long-term, to be more optimistic about the future. And what's shocking about that is it made my day-to-day life way better. I've always been into health and nutrition and working out and stuff. So a lot of Bitcoiners say, oh, I got in shape and I quit this bad habit or whatever. I think I had health pretty well dialed in, but I had this newfound sense of optimism. And it wasn't like a confidence or this like thin veneer of optimism. I think I am an optimist deep down inside, but I think I had a reason to be optimistic that was more than just my internal constitution, and that was Bitcoin. And so that led to thinking long-term. My relationship with my wife actually improved, I would say, from a shift inside, taking on more responsibility, thinking more long-term. And that led to me being really optimistic about having a family and really actually wanting it, which I didn't before. And so, yeah, I would tie that to Bitcoin in many ways. What's coming up is, yeah, we're going to do our best to raise a child here, hopefully get a few more out before we're done. And I would say from a career standpoint, I want to be at Swan until we get this thing through the door. What that is, I don't know. Is this a SPAC to IPO type thing? Is it, are we going to get acquired? Is it going to be a long-term business that we keep private? I don't actually know, but I was there around like employee 5 to 10, and now we're around 50. And I think I'm good for another 10x. So maybe we get up to 500 employees or something like that. And then I would say my next career aspect will be, I want to make sure Swan is super successful. And I want to take that opportunity to level up my skills as a builder. I have a unique opportunity there to really do that and sink my teeth into some new new things, like level up my management ability, level up my decision making, etc. And then I want to get back to more writing, thinking, speaking. I think that's how I feel the most fulfilled. So I would like to read a lot. I would like to write, surround myself with really high caliber, smart people that we have regular conversations with. I would like to surf every day rather than only on vacation, and spend a lot of time with the family, growing food and outdoors. So kind of a more simple life, but extremely rich in the things that I love. That's kind of how I see the next stage going.
Sounds like a wonderful future. I wish you the very best on that. I spent a few years working in the startup space myself, and to have joined a company in, let's say, employee 5, which is still like tiny startup, to have got to 50, like arguably through like the hardest and roughest patch a startup will go through. That experience will be incredible. And maybe you'll 10x again in employees from this stage and revenues, etc. To be able to go through that journey, I always think is the most exciting kind of career one can choose. I did a bit of angel investing, and I was looking at some other interesting angel investors, and they were generally speaking ex-entrepreneurs, the people I thought were the most interesting, rather than the career VCs. And you go, whoa, okay, so you actually did it. Fair play. That is seriously fucking hard to build a business from scratch, and to do it in such a way where, I'm sure that the lifestyle options of the businesses you were running when you were more of a nomad were, fantastic for that. But, early stage equity, build a business, breakout company, et cetera, would also be a fantastic experience. So I'm hoping it's something I'll be involved in at some point. Well, Brandon, thank you so much for your time today. I really couldn't appreciate more the fact that you've decided to spend an hour of your life chatting to me. So there's so much we can all learn from the story that you've told us today. And I couldn't appreciate more your time. So last question is, where can people get hold of you if they wanted to?
Yeah, I appreciate that, Jake. And I really enjoyed the conversation as well. I think your direction here of getting the story, or the man behind the ideas, or however you want to phrase that, I think that's really cool. And I think one of the aspects, quick tangent here, one of the aspects of Bitcoin that I find so compelling is the caliber of people who find themselves here.
Mm.
And I think that's
100% agree. Like, why are these people all adopting this stuff? Like, why? And often it's I'm sorry to cut you off. I'm very passionate about this.
No.
It's not who we are today. It's who we've become over time that helps us go, this makes sense. Okay. And now I want to help people tell those stories. And I think it's a big part of legitimizing it in terms of additional adoption. Yeah, cool. Sorry, I completely cut you off. What were you going to say?
No, it's okay. I find most Bitcoiners are passionate about this topic, right? Like the community itself it's going back to consilience, right? If you see a bunch of smart people, well-rounded people from all different backgrounds converging on this idea, that's a good sign, right? But it also is practical in the sense that it fulfills my life to a great degree, right? The people I meet in Bitcoin, even if we have very different lives, very different surface interests, because there is that shared values that are essentially bolted onto Bitcoin, that alone is enough to know that we can have a conversation for a long time. I trust you. I know how you approach the world to some degree. And I know we have enough overlap to where I would like to build the relationship. Out in normie land, I think I would say I'm more disenchanted with people I meet, because our value systems are so misaligned that even if we both like basketball and foraging mushrooms, and we can connect on those issues, if the foundational stuff's not there, it's going to be more work, and it's not going to be as fulfilling of a relationship. And so another plug here is to create a meetup if you don't have one in your city. I'm always banging this drum. I started one in Minneapolis. We started almost 3 years ago, and now it's a thriving community. I could leave and there's no problem. 50 to 100 people come every month. 15 people or more work in the industry. Another 20 guys mine at home. Wow. And so it's a very fulfilling thing. And now we're personal friends, right? It's not just people we know at the meetup. We hang out outside of the meetups. We go to each other's house for dinner. We go camping together, etc. And so I really do encourage other Bitcoiners to pursue that path. Especially if you feel isolated on your journey. Most people do at some point because their friends, their spouse, whatever, they're not on the same path
Crazy,
as you.
yeah.
So you feel isolated, you feel alienated. So that's why we love Twitter so much. That's why we love Clubhouse, right? You find your people. And I think the meat space relationships are a crucial aspect here for your own sanity. And I'm pretty sure your spouse will appreciate it if once a month you can get all that energy out instead of monopolizing the dinner table. So
Yeah,
go start a meetup.
there's some cool. So I only moved to Australia 2 years ago, and my wife is Aussie, but so my personal networks here are very small, and equally we were in I'm in Melbourne, so the lockdown regulations here were just out of control. Like almost 300 days we spent in our house. My daughter was born in the bedroom here. It was just crazy. I won't go down that horrendous rabbit hole, but there is a meetup community here in Melbourne that exists, but I haven't physically made it yet. But during these lockdowns, three, let's say slightly more senior Bitcoiners got together, and they're all from different states. So Queensland, New South Wales, Victoria. And they created something called the Bitcoin Bush Bash. And so there's every quarter, I think it is, or 3 times a year, they do a physical meetup in a different part of Australia. And so I went to a place called Beechworth, which is about a 4-hour drive north of Melbourne, in March, I think it was. And there was like 70 or 80 people in a room together in this tiny fucking town in the middle of nowhere in Australia, talking about, digital health, privacy, mining. It was epic, and I loved it. And it was great to meet everyone in person. And so to your point, it's a great release. And you suddenly, my friend Jigs, who I went with, shout out to him. He's like, God, I feel like I've met my tribe. You're like, whoa, that is powerful, right? So yeah, in future, I'm sure we'll see more physical stuff happening here in Melbourne. I started a Telegram group as well. It's called Bitcoin Mining Australia. And to just plug that for a moment, Australia is the size of a continent with 25 million people living on it. The amount of stranded energy assets on this place are mind-blowing. And there's no population to move this energy to. So whether it's natural gas or whatever it could be, the opportunities for Bitcoin miners to monetize these stranded energy assets here are like through the roof crazy. And so I'm seeing every day people exchanging ideas on mines that they're building or trying to build, or energy assets they've found. And that's obviously through a Telegram group, but there's going to be a physical meetup for that in Sydney in hopefully June, where people will get together and talk about it. So yeah, you're bang on to have gone down that hole, and I'll certainly do more work in the space to get people physically together. Hopefully I'll make it to the Miami conference at some point, but yeah, dad duties and lockdowns have made that a bit difficult so far. Well, great, Brandon, I'll stop there. So thanks so much for your time. Couldn't appreciate it more. How can people get in touch if they need to?
Yeah, absolutely. My Twitter DMs are open. B Quittem, BQUITTEM, and my writing is at brandonquittem.com. If you want to get started at swan.com/my last name /Quittem. If you sign up there, you'll get $10 worth of free Bitcoin just for creating an account. No purchase necessary, although you should totally purchase if you want to.
Buy some Bitcoin. All right, Brandon. Well, thanks so much for your time. Couldn't appreciate it more.
Thanks, Jake. Have a good one.
Bye-bye.